In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. The desert sun had barely crested the horizon when the stagecoach's horses thundered through the dusty main street of Widow's Rest. Each hoofbeat drummed like a warning through the slumbering town, rattling shuttered windows and stirring the tumbleweeds into frantic dance. Inside, 18-year-old Clara Whitmore gripped the edge of her seat, white-knuckled fingers braided in the fine lace of her wedding gown. She could taste the wind in her mouth, sharp, tasting of sand and freedom, behind the driver's battered seat. Clara's heart pounded in time with the coach's jolting rhythm. Only days before, the townsfolk had celebrated her wedding to Jonathan Pierce, a prosperous landowner with a gentle smile. But rumors had spread like wildfire in the prairie breeze. Jonathan's father had betrayed the Whitmore ranch, leaving Clara's family destitute. What was meant as a joyful departure had become a forced journey. Clara sensed her husband's hesitation in every curt knot of his jaw and every forced polite word. She had accepted her fate with the quiet courage of a young woman who grew up on the edge of the wilderness. The only Whitmore child, Clara had spent countless dawns in the stables, coaxing the shy Mustang named Sable from her stall and racing across the open plains. She had learned the subtle art of reading a horse's mood, the way a stallion's tail twitched or a mara's ears flattened. That instinct now whispered to her that this ride meant danger. When the driver lashed his whip too hard, Clara saw the lead bay stallion rear back, hooves swirling in a cloud of red dust. The horses bolted, their panic-stripped reins now useless. The coach lurched forward, carriage wheels gouging the dirt, threatening to topple and crush its passengers. Screams tore from the throats of the bride and her trembling attendants. Clara's breath caught. At that heartbeat, all of her instinct took over. She unhooked the leather strap from the coach door and wrenched it free. With a swift motion born of afternoons spent vaulting fences, she flung open the door and stepped out, the lace of her skirt brushing the ground. Wind whipped her hair into her eyes. The world blurred as she spread her arms for balance. Out below, the canyon's edge yawned like a hungry maw. Clara's pulse raced. She tasted fear for the first time. She leapt. Time stretched in that second, the sound of her own heartbeat roaring in her ears, the ground rushing up. In her mind's eye, she saw her sister's wedding gown hanging in the parlor, white ribbons tangled on coat hooks. She thought of her father's rough hands, calloused from breaking horses and working the land. She thought of the Whitmore legacy, proud, unbroken, held fast against droughts, outlaws, and floods. She would not go quietly. Below her, a lone figure on horseback emerged, the struggling rancher, Eli Waters, whose land bordered the Whitmore fields and whose debts had nearly cost him everything. His lean frame and sun-scorched face were framed by a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were steady, wary, and outraged at the sight of Clara plummeting toward doom. With a rider's reflex, he urged his mount forward, arms outstretched. The Mari dug her hooves into the soft earth, and Eli leaned from the saddle like a man granted a single divine moment. Clara's skirts ballooned around her as she fell. He caught her waist, and with a grunt that echoed off the canyon walls, he snapped into a crouch that broke her fall. His horse stumbled, but the grip between them held firm. They hit the ground together with a crash that silenced the world. The horses screeched past, flames of panic in their eyes. Clara lay in Eli's arms, rain of dust coating her lashes, her gown torn but her spirit unbroken. His calloused hands cradled her as if she were the most delicate flower in the desert. For a heart-stopping moment, they did not move. Then Clara exhaled, a brittle laugh escaping her lips. Eli's eyes met hers, green as the late spring grass that sometimes appeared after the worst droughts. "By all that's holy," he whispered, voice thick with relief and astonishment, "you're alive." Clara's heart hammered, her breath a ragged whisper. Why did you catch me?" Eli brushed grit from her cheek with the back of his hand. Can't let a bride die on her wedding morn, even if she jumps from runaway coaches to flee her own wedding. She seized his wrist, pulling him closer until their foreheads touched, two souls balanced on the razor's edge between fate and choice. Tell them ... she said, voice trembling. Tell my family I'm sorry, and that I can't go back. Eyes. Gaze flickered to the narrow track behind them, where a small crowd had gathered, Jonathan Pierce among them, face ashen, gun drawn at his hip. The whip-wielding driver urged the horses to stop, but they charged on. Chaos rippled through Widow's Rest, the sudden violence of the morning shattering its sleepy calm. Jonathan reined his stallion to a halt before Eli, fury in his eyes. "Waters," he spat, spittle flecking the dust. "You meddling fool! Release her at once, she belongs to me." Clara shook her head, pulling away from Eli's arms. "I belong to myself." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "That's not how marriage works in this territory." Eli dismounted, shielding Clara with his body. "Seems to me her heart belongs to its rightful owner." A tense silence fell. The townsfolk watched, breaths held. Clara felt her knees shake but planted her feet, letting the torn lace of her gown settle around her ankles. She lifted her chin, eyes blazing with a determination that startled even her. "I am Clara Whitmore," she declared, voice ringing across the dust-choked street. "I choose my own path. And you," she turned to Jonathan, voice unwavering, "must choose yours. But I will not ride in that coach, nor bear your name, nor bow to a fate not my own." Jonathan's hand hovered over his revolver. Behind him, a murmur rippled through the onlookers, a whisper that became a chant. "Brave, her brave." At that, something snapped in the morning air. Jonathan's shoulders slumped, as though a massive weight had settled upon him. But it was Eli's voice, quiet but firm, that broke the stillness. "She's not a prize to be won, Pierce. She's a person with dreams bigger than this town, bigger than any ranch. And if you're not willing to let her go, to let her be, then you never truly had her at all." A gust of wind roared down the street as the stagecoach lurched to a stop. Broken wood and torn lace swirled like confetti around them. The entire town seemed to exhale. Clara folded her arms across her chest, gaze unwavering. "I may be young, but I know who I am. And I'm not lost, just finding my way." At that moment, the sky darkened with a gathering cloud, as if the very heavens leaned in to witness the reckoning. Clara felt her pulse steady, no longer racing with fear, but fueled by a fierce exhilaration. She was a bride who had leaped into the unknown and landed in her own truth. Eli extended a rough hand, offering silent solidarity. Clara placed her hand in his fingers, entwining as firmly as any marriage vow. Some say their union that day was the catalyst that steered Widow's Rest toward a new dawn, a town reborn from the ashes of secrets and stale traditions. Others say it was the sound of Clara's voice carrying across the canyon that woke every tired soul to the promise of hope. But in that charged stillness, with Jonathan's silhouette retreating into the dusty haze and the townsfolk standing in awed silence, one truth became certain. Clara Whitmore had jumped, not just from a stagecoach, but into her own destiny, and the world would never again look at her or her town the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The morning after Clara Whitmore's leap, the sun rose slow and pale over Widow's Rest, as if uncertain whether to bathe this town in its light. The wind carried the scent of scorched wood, gunpowder, and overturned earth. A town changed overnight by the defiance of one girl in a torn wedding gown. Most folks still didn't know what to make of it. Some called it madness, others a miracle. But all agreed on one thing: nothing about Widow's Rest would be the same again. Clara awoke in Eli Waters' cabin, a modest structure nestled in a crag of cottonwoods just beyond the reach of town. The rafters creaked overhead, dry branches tapping against the glass like fingers reminding her that yesterday had indeed happened. Her ribs ached where she'd slammed into Eli during the fall. Her gown hung in tatters across a wooden chair, the hem stiff with dust and dried blood. She rose slowly, muscles sore and stiff, and crossed the room barefoot. Eli was outside, chopping firewood with a rhythm that seemed older than time. Sharp strike, pause, shift, another strike. He wore a loose shirt rolled at the sleeves, revealing lean arms scarred from years of ranch work and likely worse. He didn't look up when she opened the door, but his voice reached her like a warm breeze. "You hungry?" Clara blinked at the sky behind him. It was clear, washed with pale blue, but the land still trembled with the aftershock of what she had done. "Starving," she answered. He pointed toward the cast iron skillet warming on the fire pit. "Eggs and beans. Might be some jerky left too. Not a wedding feast, but it'll fill you." She knelt beside the skillet, using the corner of a cloth to lift it and examine the food. As she ate, Clara felt the weight of the world settling across her shoulders. Her family, Jonathan, the town. She had leapt with the force of instinct, but now she had to live with the consequences. Eli didn't say anything more until she finished. He handed her a cup of bitter coffee that steamed in the morning chill. Town stirred up. "Some folks are calling you a runaway bride," he said. "Others say you saved your own life." Clara sipped the coffee, letting its heat burn her tongue. "What do you say?" Eli finally met her eyes. "I say you jumped. That takes guts. And whether anyone admits it or not, it changed something. You didn't just escape, you showed them they could choose too." A silence stretched between them, deep as canyon shadows. Clara broke it first. "What's going to happen to me now? To my family?" Eli stepped back, leaning on the splitting axe like a crutch. "Hard to say. Jonathan Pierce isn't the type to let something go, especially not something that dents his pride. And your family. They've always walked the line between respect and ruin. Could be they'll face backlash, lose their standing. Could be they'll rise stronger. Depends on what they do next." Clara turned to the mountains beyond the ranch. They were still dusted with snow on their peaks, impervious to man's squabbles. "I just wanted out. I didn't mean for it to become a war." "Freedom always comes at a price," Eli said. "Question is, are you willing to pay it?" They were interrupted by the sound of hooves on gravel. Clara jumped to her feet, eyes narrowing. Ayla didn't move, only squinted toward the horizon. A single rider emerged, a boy not more than 12, his face pinched and red from riding hard. He wore the Pierce family livery. "You Clara Whitmore?" he called. She stepped forward, chin raised. "Yes." The boy reached into his coat and withdrew a folded envelope, sealed with red wax bearing the Pierce crest. He offered it with trembling fingers. He said you'd know what it meant. Said if you were a decent woman, you'd come home and make it right. Clara didn't open the envelope. She simply held it until the boy rode off again. Then she turned to Eli. "Do I have to open it?" He shook his head. "Not unless you want to." She cracked the seal. Inside were only a few words, written in Jonathan's sharp hand. "Return by dusk, or I come for you." Her blood turned to ice. Eli read the words over her shoulder, and his jaw tightened. "He means it. He'll bring men." "I'm not going back." Eli nodded. "Then we need to prepare." They spent the day reinforcing the cabin. Eli's property wasn't large, just a few acres of wind-cut land and a barn that groaned with every gust. But it was his, and Clara had never seen someone defend a piece of dirt with such care. He showed her how to use the rifle. Her father had taught her once, years ago, but she'd never handled a weapon since. Now she gripped the stock and lined up sights with shaking hands. "It's not about aiming," Eli told her. "It's about breathing. About choosing what you're willing to shoot for." Clara narrowed her eyes and fired. The tin can atop the fence post spun into the dust. "Good," he said. "Keep breathing." By nightfall, the wind had changed direction. Eli's horse shifted nervously in the corral. Clara stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, staring down the trail that led back to Widow's Rest. Dusk had come, and she hadn't returned. "He's coming," she said. Eli emerged from the cabin with 2 rifles, offering one to her. "Let him." They arrived like a funeral procession. Jonathan Pierce rode at the head, flanked by 4 men, farmhands who owed him coin, former soldiers from the war, and a bounty hunter known only as Rafe. They carried torches and wore wide-brimmed hats that hid their expressions. Clara stepped off the porch to meet them. "You read my letter," Jonathan said coldly. "I did." "Then you know I gave you a choice." Clara stood her ground. "I made mine." Behind her, Eli appeared in the doorway. "And she won't be changing it." Jonathan's eyes blazed. "This is none of your business, Waters. She's on my land." "That makes it my business." One of the farmhands reached for his weapon. Eli didn't move, but something in his posture made them hesitate. Jonathan dismounted slowly, walking toward Clara with the stiffness of a man holding back rage. "You've humiliated me, Clara. Do you understand that? My name's worth less now. My family's respect in this town was always built on fear," she interrupted, "not respect. You wanted me quiet, obedient, and when I wasn't, you turned to threats. That's not love, Jonathan. That's control." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think you know what love is? You think a man like Waters does? He can barely feed himself." "He feeds himself with dignity. That's more than you ever did." Jonathan's face darkened. He turned to Eli. "Step aside. This ends now." Eli shook his head. "You'll have to go through me." The bounty hunter moved then, hand darting to his holster. Clara's shout rang out. "Don't!" The shot split the air. Eli didn't flinch. A single puff of dust rose where his bullet had struck, just inches from the bounty hunter's boot. "That was a warning," Eli said calmly. "Next one won't be." Jonathan's men wavered. One turned his horse. Another hesitated. The bounty hunter cursed and backed away. Clara stepped between the 2 men, breathing hard. "You came here to drag me back," she said to Jonathan. "But the only one you're dragging is yourself back into a darkness you never left. You don't own me. You never did." Jonathan's voice was a low growl. "You think this is over? You think this is freedom? All you've done is start a war. Then let it begin," Eli said. "But it won't begin here. Not tonight." Jonathan stared at them both. Clara with her shoulders squared and eyes burning like the forge. Eli with his rifle slung at his side like an extension of his body. Then, slowly he turned away. His words floated back as he mounted his horse. "You think you've won, but I'll be back. And when I am, no amount of firewood or fancy words will save you." He rode off into the dusk, the others trailing behind. The night closed in around them. Clara stood still for a long time after they were gone, heart racing, body trembling. Eli placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You were brave," he said. Turned to him, tears glittering in her eyes. "I'm still scared." "Good," he replied. "Means you're alive. Means you've got something worth fighting for." She looked down at the rifle in her hands. "Do you think he'll really come back?" "I know he will, but next time we won't just be waiting. We'll be ready." And somewhere in the distance, the coyotes began to howl. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Dawn came slowly to Widow's Rest, brushing the rooftops with gold and shame. The town still whispered about Clara's leap, but now it buzzed with something darker, an unease that had settled like dust after a stampede. What was once a scandal was becoming a reckoning. The Pierce name no longer summoned respect. It summoned questions. Jonathan had returned in the night with a bruised ego and a half-fractured plan. Though his face bore no visible wounds, something behind his eyes was cracked, like stained glass under too much sun. He'd lost the public moment, the dramatic reclamation of his bride, but worse, he'd lost control of the story. He stood now in his father's study, arms crossed tightly, coat damp from morning dew. Cyrus Pierce leaned in the high-backed chair that had once belonged to the town's founding mayor, fingers steepled. "She's turned you into a fool, son." Jonathan's jaw flexed. "I'll handle it." Cyrus's voice held no heat, only weariness. "No, you'll fix it. Widow's rest. Survives on reputation. Land titles, trust deeds, water rights. If people stop fearing our name, they'll stop obeying it. That girl split more than a stagecoach." Jonathan didn't reply. He hated the cold arithmetic in his father's words. Yet he had been raised in it, baptized by contracts and sealed fates. Cyrus finally looked up. "Make it right, and make it loud." 3 miles away, Clara knelt at the creek behind Eli's ranch, scrubbing yesterday's ash from her dress. The cotton water flowed clean, though. It gurgled with warning. Her hands stung with the cold, but she welcomed it. Pain made her feel present, alive, accountable. Behind her, Eli's boots crunched along the embankment. "That dress ain't worth saving," he said softly. She squeezed the fabric and let the water drip through her fingers. "It's not about the dress." He said nothing. She looked up at him. "I don't want to hide." Ayla's face was carved from dust and wind and quiet truths. "Then we don't." They walked back to the house side by side. The air held the hush of things about to break. That afternoon, the town held a meeting in the church hall. Clara stood beside Eli, barefoot, wearing a borrowed blouse and skirt. Her hair was pulled back in a braid that had frayed in the wind. She didn't care. Mayor Winthrop called for silence. The pews groaned beneath the weight of bodies and tension. Jonathan rose first. "I've come to say what must be said." He scanned the room like a preacher addressing a choir of sheep. "Clara Whitmore and I were joined in lawful marriage. She fled. In the eyes of the territory, she's still mine." Murmurs. "Not outrage, uncertainty. This isn't just about vows broken. It's about respect, about keeping order." Clara stepped forward. "Respect isn't something you take. It's something you earn." Gasps echoed. Jonathan turned. "You'll stand up here now, like some martyr?" "No," Clara said. "Like a citizen." She faced the room. "I never ran from love. I ran from silence. From being told what I owed, what I was worth. And maybe some of you think I should have stayed in that coach. But ask yourself, if your daughter was me, would you want her tied to someone she didn't choose?" A woman in the second row nodded quietly. "He sent men to threaten me," Clara continued, voice steadier now. "To tear down the roof Eli and I built. He didn't come to talk. He came to take. And I'm here now to say, I won't be taken." The silence in the hall grew solid, heavy. Then a sound broke it, Doc McGrady's cane tapping as he stood. "Jonathan," the old man said, "this town owes much to your family, but that doesn't buy a woman's soul." Jonathan's face flushed, but he said nothing. He couldn't. The tide had turned. That night, Clara stood at the edge of Eli's property, staring into the scrubland beyond. Coyotes sang their songs in the distance. Eli approached, rifle slung. "They say you shamed him today." Clara's voice was quiet. He was already ashamed. He just didn't know it yet. Eli looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "You plan to stay?" She nodded. "If you'll have me." He looked up at the stars. "I ain't ever had anything worth keeping, but maybe that changes now." They didn't kiss, not yet. But something passed between them. Something binding. And in the distance, unseen by both, a rider watched from the shadows. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Part 4. Riders from the bluffs. The wind changed. On the 4th night since Clara Whitmore's leap from the stagecoach, The wind swept down from the northern bluffs with a howl that made barn doors rattle and stray dogs pace. It carried the scent of sulfur, sage, and something older like scorched iron or smoldering grudge. Everyone in Widow's Rest felt it, even if they didn't speak of it. Mothers pulled curtains close tighter. Children were kept inside past dusk. Ranchers checked their rifles. Clara felt it too. Eli's ranch sat quiet beneath the stars, the cabin lit with low firelight and oil lamps. Inside, she stitched a tear in one of Ella's shirts, her needle flicking in and out of the fabric like a blade in and out of skin. Eli sat nearby, oiling his rifle. Neither spoke much these days. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Quiet was no longer safety. It was Prelude. 3 miles east, hidden beneath the ragged fingers of Bluff Hollow, 5 riders waited in the shadows. The one at the center sat tall in his saddle, his silhouette black against the canyon walls. His name was Cole Eddard, and he was known from Kansas to Texas for 2 things: tracking and retribution. Jonathan Pierce had hired him with a handshake and a sack of coins, but Cole hadn't done it for money. He did it because the woman in question had become a symbol, not just of defiance, but of disobedience. In a land where men still laid claim to land, cattle, and sometimes women with the same signatures, Clara Whitmore had become a thorn in the thorn. Lawless pride of dangerous men, and Cole was the man they called when thorns had to be pulled. He studied the land below him with the eyes of a wolf. He saw the fence posts where Eli Waters had patched the barbed wire, saw the slow smoke curling from the chimney, saw the woman standing near the porch with a shotgun casually balanced against her hip. Cole narrowed his eyes. She ain't hiding. One of his men chuckled. Ain't afraid either. Cole spat. She should be. He tapped his horse with a boot and turned away. We ride at dawn. Morning came with blood-colored clouds. Clara woke before Eli, slipping from the bed with bare feet and alert senses. She moved through the cabin like a spirit, stepping over creaking boards and past the long rifle that leaned near the door. The wind had stilled, but that only made the silence louder. She walked outside, the cold biting her skin, and stood on the porch looking east. For a moment, nothing. Then motion. 5 black shapes appearing like ghosts from the brush. She didn't scream. She didn't retreat. Instead, she turned her head slightly. Eli, they're here. Behind her, the sound of boots. On wood. Eli emerged, shirt half-buttoned, rifle in hand. He didn't ask what she meant. He saw. Cole Eddard led the group, sitting so still in his saddle he looked carved from stone. "Mornin'," he said. "Turn around," Eli replied, raising the rifle. Cole didn't move. "That'd be impolite. I came to talk." Clara stepped down from the porch, eyes fixed on Cole. "Talk then." He smiled, not kindly. "You stirred up dust, girl. Men are talking about you from the mining camps to the border. Women, too, what you did. Got people questioning their own chains." Clara raised the shotgun. "Good." Cole's smile widened. "Jonathan Pierce wants you back. I'm not property." "You're a lesson," he said. "One that needs correcting." "Allies." Voice was low and calm. "We don't take kindly to corrections around here." Cole dismounte. So did the others. The clearing between the porch and the barn became a standoff. 5 guns, 2 defenders. No law in sight. Clara's breath steamed in the air. "You shoot us," she said, "and it won't end here. The town's changed. They won't kneel the way they used to." Cole studied her, then spat into the dirt. "Maybe, but first they'll bleed. Like everyone who learns too late." His hand twitched. And the world exploded. Eli's shot came first, clean, sharp center mass, on the man to Cole's left. Clara fired next, her shotgun blasting the second outlaw into the dust. The clearing erupted with gunfire. Cole dove behind a trough, drawing 2 pistols with the speed of snakes. Clara hit the dirt, reloading in practiced motions. Eli ducked behind the water barrel, shouting, "Get to the barn." They moved as one. Clara ducked under the fence. Eli covered her. Bullets whined overhead, slamming into wood and stone. Inside the barn, they regrouped. Eli tossed Clara extra shells. She caught them, chest heaving. Outside, silence again. Then Cole's voice. "I got 2 men down." "You got what? 5 rounds left between you?" Eli leaned against the wall, blood trickling from a graze on his arm. "I don't need 5. I just need 1." Cole laughed. "You don't even know who you're fighting." Clara stepped to the open barn door. "I know exactly who I'm fighting. Every man who thinks fear is stronger than choice." The next shot came so close it took a strand of her hair with it. She fell back. Eli caught her. "You all right?" "Yeah," she whispered. "But he's right. We're low." Eli looked to the barn's loft. "There's something up there we can use." They climbed the ladder together, boards groaning under their weight. At the top, Eli yanked a canvas sheet away, revealing an old Gatling gun. Clara blinked. "You've had that this whole time?" "Wasn't for people," he said. "Was for coyotes. Didn't think I'd be using it on ghosts." They set it up at the loft's open door. Cole's men were advancing again, slow, cautious. Guns raised. Clara whispered. "Now?" Eli hesitated, then shook his head. "Let them come closer. Let them think. We're out of fight." The footsteps drew nearer. A shadow passed the threshold. Eli pulled the cord. The Gatling screamed. Wood splintered. Dust flew. Men shouted. By the time it stopped, the yard was empty of sound. 2 men lay still. The others had fled, except Cole. He stood, half covered in blood that wasn't his eyes glowing with something feral. He holstered his pistols. "That was a mistake," he said. "A big one." Clara aimed her shotgun. "Try me," but Cole didn't draw. He turned and walked away, slow and proud, like a man already planning his next return. "You just made it personal," he called over his shoulder. Then he vanished into the trees. Clara lowered the gun. Eli slumped beside her. "He'll be back," she said. Eli nodded. "Next time with more than 5. She looked out over the quiet yard. Splinters, blood, smoke. "Then we better be more than 2. She didn't know how yet. But the next move wouldn't be waiting. It would be striking first. That the quiet war had ended. The real war was coming. The morning after the Gatling spoke, Widow's Rest awoke to the smell of smoke and change. In the east, the sun rose slow and wary, as if reluctant to shed light on what the night had wrought. At Eli Waters's ranch, the yard was still riddled with bullet holes, the wood of the barn torn like torn paper in places. Blood had dried in the dust. One of the fallen men, Jebry Lyles, had once delivered mail for the valley. Another, Lon Whitaker, had served under Colonel Meeks in the Mina border skirmishes. Now they were dead, and Clara Whitmore was still alive. She sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, shotgun across her knees. Her braid had loosened during the fight, strands of hair blowing in the same morning wind that fluttered. The canvas draped across the bodies. Eli hadn't said much since sunrise. He didn't have to. His silence wasn't avoidance, it was understanding. They'd both seen enough violence now to know words often cheapened what needed space. But the world didn't wait for them to grieve. Just after mid-morning, hoofbeats rose from the south. Clara stood and raised the shotgun. Eli emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. But this time, the visitors weren't hired guns or bounty hunters. They were townsfolk. Dozens of them. Marshal Eden rode at the front, his old duster flapping behind him, and beside him were Doc McGrady, Mayor Winthrop, and Martha Harrow, the preacher's widow, who once ran the schoolhouse. Behind them trailed farmers, clerks, 2 blacksmith apprentices, and even Sam Fry, the young man who used to stammer through every sentence, and now held a rifle steady against his chest. Eli raised an eyebrow. That's a crowd. Clara lowered the shotgun, but kept it in hand. They're here for a reason. Edin dismounted, his boots hitting the dust with a muted thump. He studied the yard, the torn barn, the shattered fence post, the canvas covered. Shapes, and nodded once. We heard. Cole Eddard came through. Left a mess behind. Clara stepped forward, shoulders square. He'll be back. Edin nodded again. I reckon he will. Which is why we're here. The mayor cleared his throat. Pierce put out the word. Said you attacked a lawman. Said you lured men to die. Said you were building a rebellion. Clara's voice was steady. Is that what you think? Winthrop shook his head. No, but plenty will, unless we say otherwise. Doc McGrady stepped up. We're tired of pretending, Clara. Tired of acting like Widow's Rest belongs to a single name. You showed folks there's another way. Doesn't mean it's easy, doesn't mean it's clean. But it's honest. Eli's voice cut in. You came to help? Martha Harrow lifted her rifle. We came to stand. By sunset, the ranch looked different. The bodies were buried. The barn had fresh braces where bullets had torn through the upper wall. Fence posts were replaced. Trenches were dug. In places, blind spots reinforced. Eli's Gatling had been remounted on a swivel post inside the loft. But more than that, the people had changed. They hadn't come just to look. They built. They trained. They talked. Some had never fired a weapon before. Some had. Sam Fry and Old Gus Clement spent 2 hours teaching 3 widows how to load and fire. They brought stories, too. Of Jonathan Pierce sending for more men. Of Cole Eddard, spotted 2 towns over, buying ammunition and maps. Of stagecoaches stopping halfway. Before Widow's Rest out of fear, Clara sat on the porch as dusk settled in, listening. Martha Harrow brought a tin cup of coffee and sat beside her. You scared? Martha asked. Clara nodded. Yes, but not the same way. Different kind of fear now, huh? Yeah, it's not fear of dying. It's fear that this will all be for nothing. That we'll fight and bleed and win. And still slide back. Into the same old ways. Martha took a long sip. Then we fight twice. Once against men like Pierce. Then again against the forgetting. Clara's gaze shifted to the horizon. And if we lose? Martha set her cup down. Then at least the next girl who jumps from a coach knows someone was willing to catch her. Later that night, as stars blinked open across the sky, Eli found Clara. Standing near the corral. You haven't slept. Neither have you. He leaned on the fence beside her. The silence between them had softened since that first day. It now held comfort. We can run, he said. Still time. Head west. Disappear. Clara looked at him. Would you? He met her eyes. I would, but I won't. Not if you're staying. She reached out and took his hand. Then we stay. The next morning, Clara went into town. She wore a plain riding skirt and a wool coat. Her hair was tied back. She carried no gun. Only a stack of handbills dotted the livery. She tacked one up. Then another. At the saloon. Another at the mercantile. Stand together or fall apart town meeting. Midnight. Church hall. All welcome. All needed. By nightfall. Every wall in Widow's Rest bore the same message. Midnight came like judgment. The church hall swelled. Over 50 people. Men, women, even 2 children had snuck in. Eyes wide with wonder. Clara stood at the altar. No Bible in sight. She spoke. I'm not your preacher. I'm not your mayor. I'm not even sure I'm still anyone's daughter. But I am someone who leapt off a coach and got caught by a man who didn't owe me a thing. And I think that's what this town needs to remember. Her voice gained strength. With each word, you've all seen what's coming. Jonathan Pierce wants this place to stay his kingdom. He sent Cole Eddard once. He'll send him again, and maybe more. But the truth is it isn't about me anymore, or even about Eli. She pointed to the crowd. It's about you, all of you, whether you kneel or stand. Whether widow's rest is still widow's rest, or just another place ruled by fear. The room was silent. Then Martha Harrow stood. Then Sam Fry. Then old Doc McGrady. One by one, they stood. Until the room was nothing but people refusing to kneel. Clara looked out over them. Then it settled. We don't hide. We don't wait. She lifted her chin. We prepare. The quiet war was over. Now came the storm. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The wind carried no thunderclouds that morning, just dust and warning. From the northwest ridge, a line of riders crested the horizon like a dark tide. 23 of them, by Clara's count. Not bounty hunters this time, hired guns. Paid. Soldiers of pride and cruelty. They bore no badges, only scars and smirks. They moved as one. Cole Eddard led them. His coat flapped in the breeze like a flag of fire. He rode a black gelding whose mane whipped like wildfire. And beside him rode a man Clara hadn't seen before. Broad-shouldered, older, with skin like burnt parchment and eyes like shattered glass. Word around town named him Whitaker the Butcher, once. A colonel in the frontier wars. Now a blade for hire who killed without joy or hesitation. They were coming. Eli stood beside Clara at the church tower, both watching the riders advance. 23, he murmured. Clara nodded. We have 32. 10 of those are kids barely shaving. 4 are mothers with babies. Doc McGrady can't hold a rifle for more than 10 minutes. Clara's voice was steel. Then we make 10 minutes count. The town braced. By noon, every building had been fortified. The Silver Spur Saloon had sandbags at every window. The old schoolhouse had a lookout station on the roof. Children were hidden in the cellar beneath the church, guarded by 2 fathers with double-barrel shotguns and the town's last good revolver. Marshal Eden had returned from retirement for one more stand. He stood now on the edge of Main Street, hat low, rifle in hand. Eli walked beside him. You sure about this? The old lawman asked. Eli shrugged. Not even a little. They shared a grim smile. Clara took her post at the general store's roof, where she had a clean shot at the bend in the road. Beside her was Martha Harrow, former teacher, current sniper. The older woman had brought her late husband's hunting rifle. She had one eye, but it was sharp. Don't shoot unless I shoot, Clara said. Martha clicked her tongue. I was teaching discipline before you were born, darling. Clara checked her bullets. Then let's remind them what it looks like. The riders stopped at the edge of town. Cole Eddard dismounted slowly, dragging his spurs like a man in no hurry to die or kill. He stepped forward alone, hands visible. Clara, watching from above, whispered, This is the part where he offers a chance. Martha adjusted her sights. And this is the part where we decline. Cole's voice rang through the empty air. Widow's rest. You got until sunset to give me Clara Whitmore. I leave. You stay, all nice and bloodless. He let the words hang. Marshal Eden stepped into the open. No deal. Cole nodded once. Then by sunset, you all die. Slowly. He turned and walked back. Clara watched as the riders dismounted and began circling the town. She took a breath, then fired the first shot. It hit the lead rider's rifle clean out of his hands. The clang echoed across rooftops. Then the world erupted. Gunfire lit up the street. Smoke rose in twisting clouds. The schoolhouse bell rang once prearranged signal. Townsfolk fired from windows, from rooftops, from alleys they dug in the night. Eli manned the Gatling gun in the church loft, cutting down a trio of attackers that tried to flank left. Clara ducked fire and hit 2 more from behind the water tower. Cole's men fought hard. They were trained. But they hadn't counted on the town fighting harder. And they hadn't counted on Clara. She moved like a whisper. Rifle slung across her back, 2 pistols holstered at her hips. When she ran out of ammo on the roof, she slid down the ladder and sprinted to the post office, dodging fire. A man tried to tackle her. She elbowed him in the throat, took his gun, and kept running. At the saloon, she found 3 townsfolk pinned. She slid in through the back and opened fire from the bar, forcing the attackers into retreat. Clara had never been in war. Now she was the center of one. By dusk, the streets were soaked in gunpowder and pain. 12 of Cole's men were down. 4 of Widow's Rest had fallen. Sam Fry bled from the shoulder but kept firing. Martha Harrow lost her spotter but kept climbing. Eli's arm was bandaged with a torn curtain, and Marshall Eden's face was burned from a near miss, but both stood. Clara kicked down the door of the livery, clearing it room by room, until she stood face to face with Whitaker the butcher. He raised his rifle. She shot him in the knee. He screamed. She disarmed him with a boot to the hand, then aimed down at him. Why? She asked. He coughed blood. Because men like me don't let women like you win. She fired, not to kill, but to remind. By nightfall, Cole Eddard stood alone, bleeding from the leg, arm grazed, coat torn. He staggered to the center of town. Clara met him there. He dropped his gun. You win. She didn't move. You'll just come back, she said. He met her gaze. I would've, not anymore. He turned. Walked. And Widow's Rest stood. That night, the church bell rang, not for mourning, but for memory. The town had stood. The storm had passed. And in the stillness that followed, Clara knew one thing. This was only the beginning. They weren't the accidental kind, no loose lanterns or lightning. These were intentional, calculated, and cruel. They started at the outer rim of Widow's Rest. First the grain silo, then the West Barn, then the old tannery. All places that couldn't scream. All places that carried the quiet burden of survival. By the 3rd day, smoke draped over the town like mourning cloth. Clara Whitmore stood ankle-deep in ash. The hem of her skirt blackened, watching the last of the barn collapse. Ayla stood beside her with a pail of water that did nothing against the heat rising from the coals. Marshall Eden had left earlier that morning with 2 riders to scout the ridge, but everyone knew what they'd find. Jonathan Pierce had returned. This time, he didn't ride in. He burned his way forward. That evening, the town gathered at the Silver Spur Saloon, its walls scorched but standing. Clara stood on the bar counter like a preacher without a pulpit. Her voice was raw, not from emotion but from hours spent shouting over crackling flames. He doesn't need bullets this time, she said. He's using memory. Trying to make us remember who he was, who we were. She scanned the room. But that's not who we are now. Widow's Rest doesn't belong to him anymore. And he's afraid. That's why he hides. That's why he sends fire instead of men. Someone in the back, Martha Harrow called out. Then we go to him. A murmur. Then louder voices. Right out. End it, Clara nodded. At dawn. They rode with 33. Some were farmers. Others were former gunslingers. Most were just townsfolk who'd had enough. They carried whatever they had, rifles, axes, kitchen knives lashed to broom handles. Not an army, but something more dangerous. A decision. Clara rode at the front beside Ely. Her hair was tied back in a leather thong. Her father's hunting knife strapped across her chest. She wore no dress this time, just boots, denim, and resolve. The trail west wound through burnt grass and broken fences. The ground still smoldered in places, as if rejecting the footfalls of vengeance. Midway to the canyon pass, they saw him. Jonathan Pierce, standing alone on a rise, flanked by nothing but wind. He wore black from hat to spur, a white rose pinned to his lapel, an old symbol of the Pierce family, once worn in weddings and now stained with soot. Clara slowed. Eli raised a hand. Wait here. She ignored him. She rode forward. Jonathan didn't move. When she reached the base of the hill, she dismounted, walked the last steps. Clara, he said, Voice as smooth as the whiskey he used to buy for the mayor. "Jonathan, you're early. You're a coward." He smiled. "I burned buildings, not people. That's mercy." She stepped closer. "No, that's cruelty with clean hands." His jaw tensed. "You made a vow." "I broke it, with reason." "You humiliated me. You earned it." They stood 5 feet apart. Two histories, one fire. Jonathan gestured to the horizon. "You think they'll follow you forever? That town? They followed you because I let them." Clara's eyes narrowed. "They follow truth, something you lost." He pulled a pistol. She didn't flinch. "Instead," she said, "go ahead. Make me a martyr. Let the wind carry my name farther than your wealth ever could." He hesitated. Eli reached the top of the hill behind her. Rifle raised. Others followed. Jonathan's hand trembled. Then he dropped the pistol. "I never hated you," he said. "No," Clara replied. "You just never saw me." She turned her back to him, walked away. The others parted for her like wind through wheat. Jonathan watched them go. Alone now, truly. Back in Widow's Rest. They found the last fire waiting. The schoolhouse. Flames curled around the windows like fingers pulling the past into ash. Clara rushed forward with buckets, but it was too late. The roof collapsed before the second pail. She fell to her knees. Beside her, Martha Harrow dropped a hand on her shoulder. "We'll rebuild." "No," Clara whispered. "We build new. Not rebuild, not restore. We grow from it." And so they did. That night, the children slept in the saloon. The mayor's office became a hospital. The church opened its doors for food, and the townsfolk laid planks for a new schoolhouse before the moon even rose. Jonathan Pierce never returned. Some say he rode into the canyons and died alone. Others say he wandered east, his name trailing him like smoke, but in Widow's Rest, his name was buried. And in his place grew something new, something wild. Something alive. Clara stood at the ridge overlooking the town 1 week later, the wind in her hair, the knife at her belt. She smiled, not because the war was over, but because it had finally meant something. The Pierce family ranch, 40,000 acres of highland pasture and deep basin, 2 rivers, 4 wells, and enough grazing land to feed every head of cattle in the territory, had stood for 3 generations. Its boundaries had never been questioned, its owners never challenged, until Clara Whitmore signed the ledger. It happened in the dusty office of the county registrar, in the presence of Mayor Winthrop, Marshal Eden, and a notary whose glasses fogged from nerves as he shuffled the yellowed documents. Clara sat still and straight in a borrowed wool coat, her boots coated in soot from fire-restored earth, the scar from a rifle stock still faintly marking her cheek. Her hand did not tremble. When she finished signing, she slid the document across the desk. "Is that it?" she asked. The notary nodded. "That's it. It's yours." The mayor leaned forward. "Every acre? Every blade of grass," the notary confirmed. "Pierce placed it in trust last month. Liquidated half his holdings before disappearing. Transferred the trust to ... He squinted at the final line. "The legal and moral beneficiary of justice." Marshal Eden snorted. "That sounds like him." Clara said nothing. She stood, thanked them, and left the office. Outside, the wind kicked dust across the porch. Eli waited with 2 horses saddled. He looked at her. "It's done?" She nodded. "It's done." He didn't smile. Neither did she. They rode out that afternoon, not back to Eli's ranch but west, toward the high ridge where Pierce's land had sprawled for decades, untouched by fire, shielded by wealth. The ride took 3 hours. They passed dry creek beds, old cottonwood groves, and finally the arched sign that read, "Pierce Legacy Estate." Clara dismounted. Stared. "Take it down?" Eli asked. She shook her head. "Not yet." The house stood quiet, a mansion compared to the rest of town. 2 stories, stone foundation, wraparound porch. The shutters hung straight. The windows gleamed. It looked untouched by the chaos of the last month. Too untouched. Eli stepped first through the front door. Rifle drawn. Clara followed. They found no ambush. No signs of Jonathan. Only a house preserved in stillness. Everything in place. Whiskey untouched in the cabinet. Books arranged by title and year. A fireplace with a half-burned log still sitting in its grate. But there was one thing different. In the study, a ledger sat open. Clara approached it slowly, recognizing the pierced seal burned into the leather. Inside, one line. To Clara Whitmore. What I took, I return. But the blood is still yours to carry. No signature. Just a rose petal pressed into the final page. Clara didn't speak for a long time. Eli stood by the window, watching the wind play across the dry grass. He's gone, he said. Clara ran her fingers over the page. No, he's still watching from somewhere. So what now? You run his empire? Hire ranch hands? Fence the land? She closed the book. No, we change it. The next month, the land was unrecognizable. Clara opened the gates. Built cabins where tenant workers once slept in dirt. Installed wells near homes that had gone dry. Signed 40 deeds to 40 families, all pieces of the Pierce spread, now divided equally. The name changed too. No longer the Pierce estate. Now, it was called the Rest. Land for those who'd never had any. For widows, for blacksmiths. For anyone who'd carried more than they were paid for. Families who had been one drought from ruin. She turned legacy into living, and she didn't stop. There. The schoolhouse rebuilt itself with volunteer timber. Martha Harrow took the head position. The saloon became a co-op. Even Doc McGrady handed over his books to a young girl named Estelle, who had studied medicine by reading between delivering her father's post. Everywhere, Clara's name was spoken. Not as myth but as motion. Not as a legend but as law. One night, Clara and Eli sat beneath the stars, watching cattle graze on the hills that had once been off dash limits. Eli poured 2 fingers of whiskey. The bottle had been Jonathan's, still unopened, until now. He handed her a glass. To fire, he said. She tapped hers to his. To rest. They drank. Do you think he'll come back? Eli asked. Clara shook her head. Men like him only return if they believe they were right. Jonathan knows he wasn't. Does that make him dangerous still? Clara stared into the night. It makes him regretful. And sometimes. That's worse. Eli reached over, took her hand. They didn't speak for the rest of the night, but they stayed. Together. At the edge of the rest, a child named Mara climbed a hill and looked out at the town, where she'd been born. She saw the school, the fields, the fences being built not to keep people out but to keep livestock safe. She didn't know the story, not fully, but she knew a name, Clara Whitmore, a girl who jumped, a woman who landed, a name on a ledger that once chained a town and now set it free. Part 9, a price paid in quiet. The spring that followed was the quietest the town had ever known, not the kind of quiet born of fear, the hush that settles when gunmen ride into a saloon or when a judge calls for the verdict. This was a different kind of quiet, earned, soil deep, the kind that drifts down after a storm so long and loud that nobody can quite believe it's really gone. Widows. Rest had become something it had never been before. Free. But freedom, as Clara Whitmore learned, does not mean stillness. It means motion with no master. And motion has a cost. It started with horses, dozens of them missing from surrounding counties, unbranded, healthy, and fast. Ranchers came asking questions. Eli turned them away at first, but Clara insisted on speaking with everyone. Not one had proof, not one had answers. Then it was water. 3 of the new homesteads in the rest found their wells tampered with. Salt dumped in the basins, ropes cut from buckets. Nobody saw who. Then it was fire again, a single blaze, quick, quiet. A cabin on the outer edge of the former Pierce estate, owned now by a widow named Lisa Thornton and her son. They barely escaped. Boy lost 2 fingers. Marshal Eden came to investigate, but he was slower these days, and grief lined his face deeper than time. He'd buried his own daughter that winter from fever. Not violence, but loss were the same weight. This wasn't an accident, he said, kneeling beside the blackened timber. Clara didn't answer. She already knew. At night, Clara read from a journal. It wasn't hers. It was Jonathan Pierce's. She had found it tucked in the drawer of his old desk inside the estate office she now used as a community records room. It was bound in cracked leather, the corners curled like old wounds. No titles, no dates. Just page after page of his private hand, angled and sharp. She read it in pieces. At first she'd tried to ignore it. Then she skimmed. Then she read. Inside were plans, sketches, names. Plots. But most haunting were the entries near the end. Just before he disappeared, I gave her everything, and she left me for less than I was. I cannot undo what I am. Only bury it. The name will mean nothing if the soil forgets. So I will burn what they sow. She closed the book. She knew what was happening. Now. Jonathan hadn't died. He'd fractured, and the pieces were cutting their way back. Eli found Clara one morning standing beside the West Ridge fence, watching the cattle graze. You don't sleep, he said. Not when it's quiet. You don't trust the peace. I trust it. I just don't trust it to last. He joined her, leaning on the fence. Say what you're thinking. She looked at him. I think Jonathan's alive. I think he has help. I think he's doing what men like him always do, punishing what he couldn't possess. Eli didn't argue. What do you want to do? She turned toward the town. Toward the school, the blacksmith, the gardens now growing where Pierce's horses once trampled. I want to set a trap. They made it look like weakness. They withdrew the patrols, removed the sentries, left the grain warehouse unguarded. Whispers were spread subtly, carefully by Sam Fry and 2 traveling traders, that Clara had grown soft, that the rest was unraveling. That Widow's Rest had returned to being just another patch of dirt beneath the boots of power. Then they waited. It didn't take long. 3 nights later, writers came. Not 23. Not even 10.4. But it was who led them that mattered. Jonathan Pierce. His hair had grown longer. His coat was ragged. But the arrogance, the posture of a man who believed the world still owed him remained. They crept in through the orchard, slipped through the outer posts, reached the grain warehouse where the fire oil had already been spread. They struck a match. And then everything changed. Clara stepped from the shadows. Alone. Unarmed. Her voice was quiet, but it struck like thunder. Drop it. Jonathan froze, then smiled. You always did love drama. Behind her, lights flared, every cabin lit, every rifle readied, every door opened. The whole town, waiting. Eli emerged beside her. I wouldn't, he said. The 3 men with Jonathan faltered. 2 dropped their weapons. 1 ran. Jonathan stood still. Clever, he said. Very clever. Clara stepped closer. You could have come back and changed. Could have helped rebuild. Could have meant something. I meant something before you destroyed me. No, she said. You destroyed yourself. I just stepped out of the way. He reached for the match. Eli shot the ground beside his boot. The match fell. No flame. Just silence. They jailed him. Marshal Eden made it official. But the trial was brief. The townsfolk didn't clamor for vengeance. They just watched, witnessed, held each other. He was sentenced to 20 years of labor. Not prison. The town had no prison. So they gave him a shovel and put him to work, rebuilding what he'd tried to burn. It was Clara's idea. Let him carry what we all carried, she said. Let him feel the weight of repair. Jonathan never spoke again, not to her. Not to anyone, but he dug, one post at a time. Years passed. The school grew, the crops flourished. The ledgers were balanced, and Clara slept again, but always with one truth close to her chest. Peace is not the absence of trouble, it is the presence of resilience. And she had earned it, one scar, one loss, one buried name at a time. It spread across the rest like silver lace, turning plowed furrows white and still, curling the edges of fence posts, and crisping the last stubborn leaves on the orchard trees. The town braced itself, but not with fear. It was a bracing rooted. In readiness, Clara Whitmore woke before dawn, same as always. She'd developed a rhythm that no longer belonged to survival alone, but to stewardship. The fight had ended, but the forge had begun. Because peace once won, the man's tending, and names those fragile, heavy things are forged the same way as blades, with pressure. And Fire. Jonathan Pierce had been working the far field for 76 days. He said nothing, ate sparingly, slept in the lean-to he'd built with his own hands. Marshal Eden checked on him every week, recording his progress not in law books, but in simple ledgers Clara had created to keep judgment from rotting into punishment. Some wanted him gone. Others, like young Mara and her father Thomas, had come to view him as a ghost in the field, haunting, quiet. But proof that justice didn't always mean vanishing someone from sight. Eli had suggested exile early on. Clara refused. He's a weight that teaches, she said. If we cast it off, we forget the shape of it. Inside the town hall, building once used to auction horses, now reborn as a civic gathering place, Clara unrolled 3 new maps. The rest had grown. 6 new families had joined. 2 from Montana, 1 from Kansas, 3 from the coastal territories. They brought children, skills, stories, but they also brought wounds. One woman named Salome bore scars on her neck from a husband who'd claimed her like property. Another man, Lucas, limped from an old chain break. Clara interviewed every arrival herself, not to judge but to welcome. We don't ask what you ran from, she said. Only what you hope to build. That became law. Hope over history. But with boundaries. A code was drawn. One crafted not in fear but in fire-tested memory. No man may own another's home. Land worked is land earned. Justice is the town's burden, not vengeance. Children speak before titles. Names are sacred given, not branded. Martha Harrow helped write it. Doc McGrady, now half-retired, helped ratify it. Even Eli, skeptical of too much structure, offered wisdom in the form of hard truths. We're not building paradise, he'd said. We're building something that can weather truth. That winter, Clara stood in front of the school children and held a piece of charcoal. She drew a single line across the board. This, she said, is what a name is before you live it. She drew another line crossing it. This is what the world tries to do to it. Then she added loops, curves, wait, this is what we do. We shape it. Young Mara raised her hand. But what if your name is already broken? Clara smiled. Then you're in the right place, because we know how to make strong things from broken parts. Midwinter brought sickness, not violence. Not malice. Just the old faux lungs that wheezed. Children that coughed too long, fevers that stole time. Clara organized quarantine zones, reassigned homes, converted the saloon's upper rooms into a temporary infirmary. Estelle, now 19, led the medical effort with a confidence that made Doc McGrady weep behind closed doors. No one died. The town's first full winter passed without burial, and when spring returned, it brought something else. A letter. It came by rail. Marked only with a seal. A silver star over a circle of wheat. Government. Clara opened it on the church steps. The letter was brief. Territorial governor seeks to recognize widow's rest as formal. Township proposes representation. Charter to follow. Martha Harrow read it twice. They want to count us, Clara nodded. They want to own us. Eli leaned against the rail. Will you let them? She looked toward the hills, toward the fields Jonathan still worked, toward the cabins, the school, the forge, the children's laughter. I'll meet with them, she said, but not to be counted. to show them how we count ourselves. The meeting took place in late spring. The governor arrived with 2 aides, 4 guards, and a photographer. They expected a town meeting in the saloon. Clara met them in the fields. Every family stood behind her. Even Jonathan, face hollow but eyes steady, paused in his digging to watch. The governor stepped from his carriage, looked around. Remarkable, he said. Clara nodded. We built it with names, not laws. He smiled. And yet here we are with a charter to offer. She took the document, scanned it, then lifted her voice. Do we accept their names? Silence, then Marat's small voice. Only if we keep ours. Laughter. Applause. The governor raised an eyebrow. Clara handed back the charter. We'll sign, she said. But only if one line is added. The aide scribbled. She dictated. This township shall remain sovereign in spirit, memory, and name. And with that, Widow's Rest became more than a place. It became a forge. And Clara Whitmore, no longer fugitive, no longer merely survivor, became its keeper. They found it while digging a new irrigation canal through the northern ridge, where the clay split open after a dry lightning storm. Beneath the soil, streaks of rusted red and flake gray, deeper than any farmer expected. The vein ran at a slant, long and jagged, almost like a wound the land had been hiding. It wasn't just iron, it was ore-rich, full of potential. And with it came a new kind of wager, not between gunmen. But between future and past. Clara stood at the mouth of the find, holding a piece of stone heavy with promise. Eli whistled low beside her. That's enough iron to arm every town in the territory twice over, or build, or draw vultures. She nodded. News spread fast. By the next week, 3 surveyors had shown up from Dodge. By the second week, a man from the Transcontinental Mining Union tried to buy the land. He offered 3 times what Clara had paid for the entire Pierce estate. She refused. But that wasn't the end of it. The wind shifted. Riders began circling the outer bounds again, not like before. Not overt attacks, but watching, judging. Men with scopes, wagons with strange markings. One woman dressed like a banker, but riding like a soldier. The townsfolk grew uneasy. We never asked for a mine, Martha Harrow said one evening in the council barn. We asked for rest. But the world doesn't rest, said Thomas Marat's father. We build a future here, or someone else will buy it from under us. Then we build, Clara said. But not just with pickaxes and shovels. We build rules, foundation, agreements that outlive any one hand. A vote was held, 87-12. Develop the ore, but under Clara's terms. The forge began again. They built with timber and resolve. Eli and 4 smiths from neighboring towns drew up a layout. Safe zones, exhaust trenches, cooling barns. Every worker signed the town code first. No outside contractors. No silent investors. No private stakes. It was the first cooperative mine in the territory. And it worked. Until the railroad came. It arrived not with a whistle, but with a letter. To the honored leaders of Widow's Rest. The Great Western Rail Corp. hereby submits claim to a right-of-way across your northern holdings. This is pursuant to Article 4 of the Mineral Pathway Provision, as ratified by territorial authorities. Your cooperation ensures shared prosperity. Known compliance may result in federal injunction. Clara. Read it twice, then burned it. The next week, engineers arrived. They were led by a man named Hollis Dent, clean coat, snake slick smile, a voice like smoke behind a door you shouldn't open. We're here to lay 10 miles of track, he said. No more, no less, nothing but good business. Clara folded her arms. Your track cuts through 3 homes, a grazing route, and a water line. Progress doesn't stop for chickens and cattle. It does when those chickens and cattle carry names, he smiled. Your people voted to dig. We're just helping you dig farther. Eli stepped beside her. Try it, Hollis tipped his hat. You don't want to make this personal. Clara's voice was ice. It was personal before you wrote my name on a form I never signed. That night, Clara called a town assembly, not just council. Everyone. They gathered at the forge barn. Packed shoulder to shoulder. She stood on the anvil block. They've sent men who believe paperwork means power, she said. Who think signatures matter more than hands. She lifted a copy of the town code. This is the only contract we honor. Written in effort, forged in loss. We will not sell. The barn thundered with applause. The next morning, Det returned with Ritz. And men. 30 uniformed contractors, not army, not militia, private. They came with hammers. Clara stood on the property line with 37 townsfolk behind her. Not armed with rifles, this time with deeds, with land records, with children holding hand-drawn maps showing where they played, where their goats drank, where their elders prayed. Dent tried to cross. Marshal Eden stopped him. I may be old, he said, but I've got enough left to shoot once. And I don't miss. Dent hesitated. Clara stepped forward. We're not at war, she said. We're at law. But make no mistake, our law has teeth. Dent left. 2 weeks passed. The governor arrived again, this time unannounced. He stepped into Clara's office. You're playing a dangerous game, he said. No, she replied. I'm refusing to fold. He sighed. The rail could bring commerce, safety, connection. It could also bring silence. Of the wrong kind. He studied her. You could be a senator. I already lead more than a district. I lead a people. You won't always have the upper hand. Then I'll teach others to use both. Clara proposed a wager. A 10-year lease, 1 spur track, no access to the heartland, just a link owned by the town. Used by all, they called it madness. But the governor signed, because he knew. The only thing more powerful than gold is conviction, and widow's rest. Had more of that than any vault. The track was laid by spring. Not by dense men, but by townsfolk. Children lined it with flowers. Miners hammered with purpose. Blacksmiths checked every nail. And when the first train rolled through, Clara watched from the ridge. It didn't roar. It hummed. Like wind through wheat. Iron on iron. But forged in names. Closing parenthesis. The clouds hung like promises unfulfilled, gray and swollen, for weeks before the sky finally opened. When it did, it was not with violence, but with grace. The flakes fell slow, fat, quiet. They covered the rest like a blanket woven from silence. And memory. Clara Whitmore stood on the roof of the forge barn, watching them fall. She was older now. Her hands bore new scars. Her shoulders carried more than most would ever know. But her eyes, those hadn't dimmed. If anything, they saw farther. The town below pulsed with life. The smithy glowed. The children sang as they walked to the school. Even the old church bell rang at noon. Not for prayer, but to remind everyone to eat. Clara smiled, but she didn't descend. Not yet, because she knew something the others didn't. The snow had brought a letter. It arrived in a sealed pouch carried by rail, handed off from station to station until it reached the postmaster, who recognized the handwriting and held it like it might detonate. He gave it to Eli. Eli didn't read it. He brought it straight to Clara. She took it on the roof. Alone. It was short. They know. About the mine. About the vote. They want to make an example of you. Come east. Quietly, I can protect you. One last time. J.P. Jonathan Pierce, gone a year. Released early on Clara's orders terms, unknown to anyone but her and the marshal. He'd left without fanfare, without violence. Just a nod in a bag. Now it seemed his old connections hadn't forgotten, and neither had he. Clara folded the letter. Then burned it in a tin can by her boot. She didn't move, she waited. Because some things, some names, come back. They came 4 nights later. 6 riders. Black coats. Gray masks. No insignia. They didn't ride through the town. They came from the east, through the ridge, along the old orchard line. But they weren't invisible. Nothing was. Any more. Mara saw them from her window. She rang the bell. Not once. 3 times. Signal. The one Clara had taught them long ago. Not fire. Not flood. But shadow. Clara was ready. Not with guns. Not with guards. With records. She met them outside the forge. Alone. As always, they dismounted. The tallest stepped forward. You are Clara Whitmore? I am. You're in violation of a federal land allocation clause, Section 4, Eastern Trade Law. Unauthorized mineral development. Cooperative sovereignty. She held out a ledger. Our charter. Signed by the governor. He didn't. Take it. You'll come with us. She smiled. No. He raised a hand. The sound of rifles cocking echoed from the roofs. Every roof. Children. Elders. The mayor. The blacksmith's apprentice. Even old Marshal Eden, from a chair with a blanket. Across his lap, held a pistol steady. Clara's voice didn't rise. We are not a militia. We are a town. But if you try to take me, you will answer to them. The man hesitated. Behind Clara, Eli stepped forward with a small stack of papers. These are the land agreements. The rail lease. The cooperative codes. Filed and notarized. If you want to fight, it'll be in court. And it'll be long. More silence. Then the man turned. And rode. No words. Just wind and snow. That night, the town gathered. Not in panic. In purpose. They wrote letters. To senators. To journalists. To scholars. They told their story. Not just Clara. Single quotes. There's. And the world listened. Quickly. But enough. By spring, the news had spread. A town run on names. Not guns. Widows' Rest defies the corporations. A forge of freedom in the western dust. Pilgrims came. Not to worship. To learn. Young leaders. Women from across the territories. Men who'd left their armies. Former outlaws. Survivors. They came to listen. And Clara told them, don't follow me. Build where you stand. Forge where you fell. Let your names mean something more than what they were given. Years passed. The iron ran deep. The land grew stronger. So did the people. And Clara, with time, stepped back. Not out, just back. She trained others. Mara became mayor. Eli taught ranchcraft at the school. Estelle ran the clinic. Clara planted trees. Dozens of them. All along the ridge. And when she was asked why, she said, so someday, when they ask what we built, we can point to shade. One morning, Clara did not come to breakfast. The fire was lit, the bread uncut. Her coat was missing. Eli found her at the top of the ridge, standing by the orchard line. He didn't speak. She handed him a letter, then turned and walked east. Not running. Not chase. Just going. Eli opened the letter. My name was once a whisper. Now it is a root. I must see where the branches reach. You are the rest. I was just the beginning. He watched until she vanished beyond the tree line. Then turned back. To the town that bore her name, that needed it no longer, because it had its own. In the pale dawn light, Clara Whitmore walked beneath the cedar boughs that lined the narrow pass. Each step crunched softly in the frost-hardened grass, and the only sound was the slow rhythm of her breath and the distant echo of the towns she had helped build. The wind here carried no familiar dust. It smelled of pine and the promise of places she couldn't yet name. She had left the rest behind. In the pale dawn light, Clara Whitmore walked beneath the cedar boughs that lined the narrow pass. Each step crunched softly in the frost-hardened grass, and the only sound was the slow rhythm of her breath and the distant echo of the towns she had helped build. The wind here carried no familiar dust. It smelled of pine and the promise of places she couldn't yet name. She had left the rest behind without farewell, an absence felt more keenly than any departure shrouded in tears or proclamations. In leaving, Clara had honored the town's own growth, allowing its name to flourish without tether. But now, alone, she felt the old ache of possibility and fear entwined, clad in a leather coat weathered by prairie storms and heavy with resolve. Clara carried only a satchel of supplies, Jonathan's old journal, and a single photograph pinned to her heart, a smudge of charcoal children's drawings held by laughter, signed Mara, age 8. She had pressed toward the sunrise, drawn by the silent call of landscapes beyond the ridge, a need to test what she had taught, and what she might yet learn. The pass opened onto a sweeping valley veiled in morning mist. Smoke curled in pale spirals from scattered cabins nestled among groves. Clara picked her way toward the nearest settlement, a cluster of simple homesteads and a lone steam whistle singing faintly in the distance. By mid-morning, she reached the outskirts of Green's Fork. Its name came from the river that cut through the valley, a ribbon of jade water fed by melting snows. The town's heart lay where the river forded, marked by a low wooden bridge and a weathered sign that read, Green's Fork, population 432. She paused, unsure of her welcome. Green's Fork was not the rest. Its people would not know of the woman whose name was carried in wind and ledger. Yet here, Clara saw potential threads of kinship, the cooperative granary built by farmers banding together, the evening school, where a teacher lit lanterns against the chill, the blacksmith forging horseshoes in a glow of embers reminiscent of the rest's early days. Before she could approach, a voice called her name. Clara Whitmore? She turned to find a man stepping from the shade of an elm tree, a tall figure in a dust-smeared duster, eyes bright with recognition. Eli? She murmured, heart lurching. He nodded, hat in hand. You left a summons. Come east, quietly, I can protect you. One last time, I thought you might show up here. She exhaled, relief and curiosity mingling. I needed ... to see what I had built, and perhaps what I might build anew. He studied her, the shadows under his eyes hinting at journeys of his own. You did well back home, Clara. The rest stands strong. But this place, Green's Fork, wants what you offered us. Stability, sovereignty. They're asking for a guide. Clara folded her arms. I left a town in good hands. I'm not looking to create another. Maybe it's not creation, Eli suggested. Maybe it's stewardship. A new frontier, but guided by what you know. She turned back to the bridge where folk moved like bees between fields and workshops. A child's cry rang from the schoolhouse, laughter from the granary. The river shimmered quietly, indifferent to human making. Clara took a step forward and hesitated. Tell me, she said, voice low. What do they want from me? Eli smiled softly. Not what you were, what you've become. At that moment, the steam whistle sounded a long resonant call that vibrated through the valley like a challenge. The railroad had arrived, its iron lines threading north and south, promising new markets and new conflicts. Clara's heart clenched. The rest had faced its railroad, forged its lease, and built its own spur. But here, the lines cut deep through settled land and shared waters. A figure emerged from the smoke, a woman in a black suit as stiff as iron, riding a railcar's front platform. She tipped her hat at Clara. Miss Whitmore, the woman called. Her voice carried across the misted rails. I represent the Continental Lines. We heard of your work. We seek your counsel and perhaps partnership. Clara squared her shoulders. The rest had taught her the price of uneasy packs. Yet she sensed that this partnership, if handled with care, could expand the circle of shared sovereignty rather than shrink it. She looked to Eli, whose quiet nod gave her the words she needed. Continental Lines, Clara called back. Meet me at the granary in 1 hour. Together we'll decide whether this valley will bow or breathe. The train whistle echoed again, and the morning light fractured through steam, spotlighting a new path laid across the land. As Clara descended, Toward Green's Fork, a figure slipped from the tree line beyond the tracks. A man wearing a gray mask, carrying a rifle. The man in the mask didn't linger. He stepped back into the woods with a surgeon's grace, silent and unseen. Yet Clara had caught enough gray cloth over his mouth, a glint of silver on the crop, and a posture that didn't belong to a passerby. It belonged to a shadow with memory. Eli noticed her stillness. Who was he? I don't know, Clara said. But he's not new. The granary was warm from the oven heat of noon bread baking. Clara took her seat at the end of the long table, where grain records used to be scrawled. But now maps and ink marked conversations of policy and protection. The Continental Line's representative arrived exactly on time. Her name was Mercy Harlan. Clara knew the type. Crisp, educated, armor in every stitch of fabric. Mercy offered a hand-gloved and an introduction like a practice sermon. I represent stakeholders from coast to coast. The lines we lay are arteries of civilization. Clara offered tea. Mercy declined. Eli stayed silent, arms folded. Mercy laid out a charter, a generous one. Infrastructure, telegraph service, irrigation rights, even scholarships for Greens Fork's children to attend engineering schools. In return, right-of-way, mining access, timber clearance, naming rights. Clara's eyes narrowed at that last one. You want to name the rail spur? We'd like to call it Harlan Crossing. Clara smiled. It was sharp. No, Mercy blinked. You haven't heard the terms. I've seen the results of names bought by ink. I live by names earned in blood, sweat, and witness. Mercy's lips tightened. What are you suggesting? Clara pushed a hand-drawn map forward. The track runs here. We build it ourselves. You lease the junction. Shared toll. Greens Fork remains sovereign. Mercy studied it. I'll need time. You'll have until dawn. That night, Clara walked the town perimeter. It was habit now, listening not just with ears, but with instincts honed by fire. She reached the orchard line where the masked man had stood. The ground was undisturbed. No boot prints, no horse sign. Nothing but the faint scent of tobacco and cold steel. She turned, and there he was. 10 feet away. Watching. Unmoving. Didn't reach for a weapon. I don't run, she said. He nodded. You left a ledger unfinished. His voice rasped beneath the cloth. Now others want to rewrite it. Who are you? He stepped closer. And pulled the mask free. Clara inhaled sharply. It wasn't Jonathan Pierce. It was his son. The eyes were the same, icy with ambition, but younger, wounded, sharper. You go by a name? Clara asked. He didn't answer. Then, I go by Ghost. She snorted. Of course you do. He didn't flinch. I was raised by men who wanted your blood. I read my father's journals. I know what you did. What I did. You made him into a warning. He made himself into a grave. Ghost stepped closer. I don't want revenge. I want understanding. Clara tilted her head. Then why the mask? To remind you, history never dies. It just changes costumes. She studied him. You want in. You want a say in what we build. He nodded. Then take off the mask and pick up a shovel. Ghost said nothing, then vanished into the trees, but not without a whisper. I'll return. With questions. Dawn came. Mercy Harlan returned to the granary. She looked different, less sure. We've reviewed your terms. Clara waited. We'll sign, but we require 2 things. Clara raised an eyebrow. 1. You allow 1 representative of our choosing to sit at council once per quarter. Non-voting. Mercy nodded. 2. The spur carries a plaque at its head. A single word. What word? Mercy smiled, genuine for once. Rest. Clara felt her throat tighten. That spring, they broke ground. Greens Fork rose not in the image of the rest, but in its spirit. Orchards, communal wells, schoolhouses beside smitheries. The line ran true, curving gently around homes instead of through them. And one day, Ghost returned. No mask. No threats. Just hands and questions. Clara gave him both. She told him about fields rebuilt by failure, about nights spent fearing silence more than gunfire, about mains forged not in fame but in forgiveness. He listened. He stayed. By harvest, the town held its first festival. Clara didn't give a speech. She just danced. Laughed. Let herself become part of a place instead of its shield. And for the first time in decades, she allowed herself the smallest luxury. Hope. But the world, as always, watches those who hope. And somewhere beyond the rail line, deep in the cities where ink and gold still ruled, another letter was sealed. Marked for Whitmore. Destination unknown. Sender sealed. Inside, a single phrase: the ledger still breathes. No rider delivered it. No whistle warned of its coming. It was simply there, tucked beneath Clara's door, sealed in red wax with no crest, just the faint impression of a feather quill and a ring of thorns. She stared at it for a full minute. Before picking it up, her fingers tingled. The wax cracked. The paper inside was thick, heavier than parchment, inked in tight strokes, precise and old-fashioned. Asterisk. The ledger still breathes. Its last chapter was not yours to close. The name Whitmore echoes beyond the rest. You are summoned. The Assembly of Proprietors. There was no location. Just a date. 3 weeks away. She showed the letter to Eli, and Ghost. Ghost went pale. I've heard of them, he whispered. They're not government, not corporation, not militia. Then what are they? Eli asked. Ghost looked down. They're the ink before the laws. The hands that write names into history and then erase them when needed. Clara folded the letter. Then we'll write ours in stone. She prepared. Not with bullets or ledgers. With stories. She spent each evening at the schoolhouse, telling the children tales from the Rest's earliest days. She wrote letters to Mara, now leading the Rest's trade council. She left copies of the Greens Fork Charter in 3 different places, one in Eli's hands, one in the granary vault, and one buried beneath the orchard tree. She packed light. She traveled alone. The journey was long, through river canyons, across shadowed plains, through towns that still bore wounds of their own war's gunfights, droughts, and worse, silence. She reached a rail station with no name. Only a man in a 3-piece suit waiting beside a carriage. Ms. Whitmore. She stepped aboard. They traveled 2 more days. No stops, no questions. The assembly met in a mountain lodge cloaked in fog. The room was warm, but the faces were colder than frost. 9 sat at the table, all older, all dressed in neutral tones like faded flags. 1 woman, 6 men, 2 whose age was ageless. They did not offer names. Only questions. Who gave you the right to found a sovereign town? The people who bled for it. You broke contract. Law by denying resource leases. I enforced community rights. You claimed moral precedent. That's not binding. It is when children sleep under it. You've become a symbol. That makes you dangerous. To who? They paused. Then the eldest spoke. Symbols inspire revolt. We offer containment. A foundation. Join us. Sign our charter. Become one of us. Influence history from the inside. She stared. Then laughed. It wasn't bitter. Just real. History doesn't need curation. It needs truth. And truth comes from the ground up. Not from a mountain lodge. They didn't flinch. Then we'll erase your name. She leaned forward. You can try. But you didn't write it in the first place. They gave her a second letter. A choice. Sign the charter. Accept limits. Become a figurehead, a controlled flame. Or refuse. Be declared rogue. Lose the protections her name carried. Be hunted. Again. She slept on it. By a fire that crackled in a lodge. She didn't trust. In dreams, she saw the orchard. Mara's laughter. Estelle's steady hands. Ghost planting fence posts with Eli. And a name etched on the bell of the Rest. Clara, not saint, not martyr, just one who stayed. She woke with tears on her cheek and resolve in her spine. The next morning, they found the letter unsigned. Instead, she left a single word, breathe, and she was gone. Back at Green's Fork, Eli found her sitting by the river. She didn't speak. She just leaned into his shoulder. Did they threaten you? He asked. Yes. Did you let them win? She shook her head. Then let's build. And they did, but they weren't naive. They watched the hills. They coded their letters. They trained every child not just in numbers and letters, but in how to listen, how to stand, how to speak when the time came. The assembly didn't strike immediately. They were more patient than that. But Clara had written something they couldn't erase. A town with memory, a ledger made of names and living breath, and a promise that no matter what came next, the people would decide the ink. A new charter arrived in Green's Fork, unsigned by the assembly, but bearing their fingerprints in every clause. It proposed a centralization of land management, a resource optimization committee. It offered subsidies for harvest security, training, education, but at a price: Clara's autonomy, the town's vote. The name on the school. Clara read it aloud in the granary hall. By the third paragraph, silence gripped the room like frost. By the fourth, Eli stood. Let them come with fire, he said. At least then we'll smell smoke. But Clara shook her head. No, this is smarter. They'll turn neighbor on neighbor. Let papers divide where bullets can't. Within days, strange debates began to stir. Miller Tom, once a quiet carpenter, began questioning town votes with assembly phrasing. Lena Harp, the school's math teacher, suddenly proposed a new civics curriculum, one stripped of local history. Even the grocer's deliveries were delayed, reorganized through new rail schedules mandated by Harlan Junction. Everywhere, influence spread without face or fingerprint, but Clara knew where it led. She called a council, not behind closed doors, but on the Orchard Ridge. Every citizen attended. Once, Clara began, we forged peace with rails and sweat. Now they send lawyers with smiling mouths and hollow pens. She held up the charter. This is how a town dies, not in fire, but in compromise without consent. She tore the document in half. Let the wind carry the pieces. Then she announced the plan. Not resistance, resilience. She called it the Margin Project. A counter-ledger. Each family would maintain dual records. What they grew, what they gave, what they chose. Not for tax, not for audit, but for truth. They would print their own newspaper, set up wind-powered transmitters, create a second line of memory not in ledgers kept by others, but in daily breath. Names. Effort. And song. Children began collecting oral histories. Ghost organized patrols, not armed, but observant. Watchers trained to document outside influence. Eli and Clara drafted the Charter of Reclamation, a living document of autonomy, updated monthly by vote. It spread. Other towns asked for copies. Soon, 37 settlements joined. A network. Clara had not founded it. She had simply said, we remember ourselves. The assembly struck back, this time, not with paper, with fire. 3 relay towers burned, 1 granary poisoned, 2 emissaries vanished on the Eastern Trail. They never found the bodies, but they found a coin, the assembly's seal, pressed into a scorched beam. Grief gripped the town, but not fear. Clara stood at the funeral pyre. These flames won't silence us. They'll light the pages we write next. And so they wrote, and sang. And remembered. The margin grew, a signal tower lit in the north, a library built in the south. Child's drawing of Clara entered the museum in Twin Hill. And with every new name added to the ledger, Clara felt the cost, because the more they remembered, the more the assembly wanted her gone. One night, as frost crept back across the valley, a figure appeared at her door. Not masked. Not armed, but desperate. It was Mercy. Harlan. Clara opened the door without a word. I defected, Mercy said. They're moving on a new plan. It's darker than before. No ink, no courts, just erasure. Clara gestured her inside. What are they planning? Mercy pulled out a map, a circle marked around Greens Fork. Red. Labeled Void Zone Authorization. Within 6 weeks, Mercy whispered. They'll declare the valley a non-recognized settlement. Cut the lines, kill the credit, and send a private force to relocate every resident. Go step from the shadows. How many? 50, Mercy said. Elite, no uniforms, no names. Clara didn't flinch. Then we'll give them names. The plan was simple. Record everything. Face, time, location. Every visitor logged. Every radio transmission copied. Broadcast live, 24 hours. If the assembly wanted secrecy, Clara would answer with the opposite, absolute visibility. The project was called The Lantern, and it burned bright, too bright to be extinguished in silence. The force arrived at dawn. Disguised as aid workers, they came with crates marked vaccines and infrastructure parts. But the town knew better. At the bridge, Clara stood waiting. Eli on her right. Ghost on her left. Mercy held a camera. They were already streaming. The lead officer stepped forward. You are harboring dangerous dissent. Clara smiled. No, we're cultivating truth. And you just walked into the middle of it. A child held up a sign. It read, My name is Sam. I planted 10 trees. What did you build today? The officer faltered. Clara nodded to Ghost. He handed over a folder. Inside, photos, maps, names. Proof. The force didn't attack. They left. Because, when faced with witnesses, even shadows must pause. That night, the valley sang. From Greens Fork to the rest, voices rose in defiance and joy. A fire burned in the town square, not to mourn. To celebrate. A girl stood beside Clara, maybe 12, holding a recorder. What's your name? She asked. Clara. Melt. I've had many, but here. I'm just someone who helped others remember their own. The girl nodded. Then that's what I'll call you. Clara smiled. And what's that? The girl pressed play. The keeper of the margin. Miles away, the assembly watched. Their charter curled in a fire of its own, and someone whispered, She won't stop. No, said the eldest, but neither will we. They drew a new plan, one word, extinguish. Not the peace of stillness, but a carved absence, a missing birdsong, a failure in wind, the hush that descends when something terrible has already begun. Clara Whitmore woke before dawn and felt it. A pressure in the air, a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. She stepped outside her cabin and looked toward the valley. No smoke, no thunder, but the sky had changed. The stars blinked oddly, as if viewed through haze, not of weather, but of interference. The assembly had begun its next move. Mercy Harlan met her on the Orchard Ridge. They're deploying what they call inkfall. Clara raised an eyebrow. Explain. Mercy handed her a thin black card, unmarked, cold to the touch. They've started erasing settlements from public record. Infrastructure, documents, census files, all digitized history, gone. As if the towns never existed. Clara blinked. Digital? Mercy nodded grimly. Yes, but deeper than that. They're also deploying disruption swarms, satellite-massed drones that block signals, delete archives, burn storage quietly. The lantern may not survive the week. Clara closed her fist around the card. Then we move faster. The next console was different. Held underground, inside the town's root cellar, lit by biolamps made by the school children. All screens covered. All records copied to wax paper and hand-bound. The future, Clara said, has a heartbeat. But now we must teach it to bleed ink that doesn't wash away. They created the fireproof ledger, one copy stored in a mountain cave. Another buried beneath the water tower, a third flown out via glider, headed toward unknown allies in the range. Territories. The fourth was left an open-air dot, because not every truth should hide. Then came the night when the lantern fell. A pulse wave hit the tower like lightning. Screens went dark, batteries drained instantly. Signals screamed, then vanished. Clara watched it collapse from the ridge. No explosion. Just stillness. Then, smoke. Ghost stood beside her, jaw clenched. They're not warning us anymore. No. Clara said, this is the warning. The next wave hit without noise. The roads into town turned to ash overnight. Literally. Where once there were gravel paths, only dust remained. Vehicles tried to pass and sank. They used a chemical agent, Mercy explained. Dissolves binding agents. Targets materials, not life. But it isolates us, Clara said. No trade. No evacuation. No reinforcements. Eli slammed a fist on the map. We are the reinforcements. Clara made the decision that night. The margin would go mobile. Not the people. The story. She formed what she called the walkers of the ledger, teams of 2 or 3, trained in oral memory, codes, storytelling, and cartography. They would scatter, carrying the truth in voice and tattoo, whisper and melody. Wherever you go, she told them, sing a line from the orchard, draw the path to Green's Fork on a child's palm. Let no village forget we lived, that we live still. The walkers departed the next day. Not in a rush. But in rhythm. Each step a word, each mile a verse. Then came the night of the black rains. Fine ash fell from the sky, not natural, not burning but synthetic. It choked lanterns, blinded livestock, coated every field in a gray film. And in the center of town, pinned to the door of the library, a single paper. Last chance, Whitmore. Bend or disappear. Ghost took the paper, lit it with a match, let it burn to nothing. In response, Clara climbed to the roof of the granary, struck the iron bell, and declared open council. Everyone came, even children, even the infirm. And Clara said one thing, they wish us silence. Let's make memory louder. The final counterstrike was not made of fire. It was made of ink steel. The blacksmith, a quiet woman named Marla, had been experimenting with a compound of coal dust, melted scrap, and pollen resin. What she created was a tablet, rough, indelible, magnetic, a medium resistant to pulse waves, to data wipes, to fire. They etched into it the Charter of Reclamation, carved by hand. Line by line. They set it in the center of town. It stood taller than any man, and etched on its base, we remember, we remain. When the assembly's next force arrived, drones circling, signal scramblers buzzing, they saw the tablet. Saw the people gathered beside it, not with weapons. But with instruments. Clara held a violin. Eli a hand drum, Ghost a recorder, and together they played a single melody. One born from the wind between orchard rows, and streamed miraculously by a hidden uplink Mercy had kept safe, buried beneath a chicken coop. The world watched. And the world chose. Petitions rose from cities across the continent, scholars, activists, wanderers. All we want, they said, is to remember the way Green's Fork did. The assembly recoiled, but it was too late. Inksteel shipments began across dozens of villages. The Fireproof Ledger Project gained sponsors, a movement, one Clara never named, but everyone else did. The Ashline Accord, a line of memory scorched but unbroken. Late that year, Clara stood once more by the river. Ghost at her side, Mercy planting trees with children. Eli laughing in the distance. A soft wind carried ash, but it no longer choked. It danced. Clara opened her notebook, wrote a final line. Ink can be burned, but stories? They smolder. She closed the book. The ledger was not finished, but it no longer needed her alone. It belonged to everyone now. The day the Ashline Accord was signed, Clara wasn't in Green's Fork. She was in Hollow Bend, a border village that had nearly vanished during the drought years. Now it was thriving again, thanks to three simple things: seeds, stories, and signal. Children here already knew her name, but they didn't speak it with reverence. They spoke it like a shared joke. "Miss Whitmore?" A girl asked, arms folded. "Is it true you once kicked an assembly man off your porch with a broom?" Clara looked up from planting winter roots. Double quotes wrong. "I hit him before he reached the porch." Laughter rolled through the field. That was what victory looked like. She realized not banners or parades, but gardens. Memory without fear. The accord had been signed in 12 towns on the same day. It wasn't a legal treaty. It wasn't a revolution. It was something older. A vow of stewardship. Settlement pledged to maintain a local ledger by hand and by oral record. Share knowledge but never hoard it. Protect memory against silence. And, perhaps most radical, let no name be forgotten without choice. They called it the Echo Clause. Every citizen could write their story, fact, fiction, fragment, and have it sealed into the regional archive. An echo that would not fade. The assembly tried to mock it. Their press outlets called it a sentimental bonfire of discipline. But then a town in the high expanse released a song made entirely of archived voices. It climbed the charts. Girl in coral docks tattooed her grandmother's ledger signature on her arm and posted it to her broadcast channel. It went viral. The Echo Clause spread like fire through dry brush. Not rebellion. Remembrance. In Green's Fork, Mercy Harlan became something no one had expected. Teacher. Her lectures on propaganda and corporate strategy became legendary. Never trust a contract that arrives without a sender, she told her class. And never fight an enemy who thinks it's a negotiation. The children nodded. Then went out to play. Eli and Ghost co-founded the first cross-region memory bank. It looked like a barn, smelled like hay and salt, but inside it held thousands of stories carved into inksteel tablets. Visitors cried in the hall. Laughed. Left offerings. One boy knelt beside a plaque and whispered, "This was my great-grandmother. She grew beets. She also once fought off a bear with a spoon." Clara didn't lead anymore. She wandered. Helped rebuild wells, sang at funerals, gave birth certificates to babies born without records. She stayed long enough to plant something: hope, corn, courage, then moved on. She never carried a weapon, only a satchel of blank pages. One evening, she arrived in the town where the walls bore paintings of a woman with gray eyes and orchard hair. It took her a moment to realize they were of her. The mayor greeted her quietly. "We hoped you'd come." "Why?" Clara asked. "Because we named our street after a song your town sang, and we wanted to get the lyrics right." Clara nodded. Then joined them in singing. But the assembly wasn't dead. Only fractured. Splinter groups rose, some in suits, some in code, some in dust-covered ruins. They tried to adapt, offered to digitize the accord. To streamline the Echo Clause. They offered money. Speakers. Free education. But the towns remembered. And politely refused. Every single time. One winter, Clara received a letter. Handwritten. Signed by a name she hadn't seen in decades. Isaac read. A former assemblyman, once the architect of half the contracts that nearly erased her. Now retired. Ill, living in seclusion. He asked for a meeting. "I want to offer something before I go. No tricks, no agenda. Just ... a page I can't carry anymore." Clara debated. Then packed a coat and went. He lived in a crumbling estate near Ashcap Bay. The inside was dust and paper. Ledgers. Contracts. But also ... drawings. Maps. And one book bound in orchard bark. "I stole this from the rest," he admitted. "Back when you still carried a rifle." Clara opened the book. Inside were sketches of orchard rows, notations in her mother's handwriting, pressed leaves. Red watched her. "I was wrong," he said. Clara looked up. "You were efficient." "No," he whispered. "I was afraid." She Nodded dot, then closed the book dot and left it on his table. You can keep it. It remembers you too. He cried, not for forgiveness dot, but for recognition dot as she left Ashcap. Clara saw something impossible. A child playing by the cliffs humming a tune. From the lantern broadcast dot she approached. Where'd you learn that? My granddad sings it when he forgets what year it is, the child said dot. Clara smiled, and left a blank page in the cracks of the cliff. For whoever came next. Back in Green's Fork, spring returned. The orchard bloomed dot. Ghost and Eli sat on the Keo porch, arguing over tree spacing. Mercy walked by with a child on her hip. Clara arrived at dusk. They didn't ask where she'd been, only what she'd found. She held up a book, its pages empty, but its spine strong. Room for more, she said, then sat dot and watched the stars return dot. Miles away, a town no one had mapped yet lit a fire, and a woman with braids and calloused hands opened her ledger. She wrote, "We were told to forget. We chose instead to echo." Then she passed it to her daughter, and the light grew. The drought came the same year. The rivers remembered their old names. Not a natural drought. Not entirely. Satellite weather grids were being recalibrated by the remnants of the Assembly's proxy tech firms. Small towns saw their skies shunted. East, cloud drift redirected. Rain denied. Green's Fork was among the first to feel it. Wells lowered. Crops faltered. The orchard groaned beneath a sun that felt wrong, sharp, sterile. And once again, Clara Whitmore stood before a town trying not to break. But this time, her voice shook. "This isn't just sabotage," she said. "It's erasure through attrition." Eli stepped forward. "Then we outlast them." They called it the Dust Chapter, a name taken from an old song Clara once sang by a dying campfire. Right in the wind. If the page is gone. She meant it literally, since ink ran dry and screens were useless in the heat. The town returned to dust glyphs, messages stamped into hardpan with boots, rakes, even finger bones of saplings dot. It became a new dialect. Children learned to read. Wind traces like script dot, and soon other towns followed. Across the Accord, messages began to appear beneath footpaths, etched on barn roofs, traced in soot above hearths. Still here. Still free. Still writing. The Assembly had fractured into 4 main entities by now. The Archival Syndicate, holders of remaining digital history, gatekeepers of access. The Meridian Contract Block, economic enforcers, masters of resource strangulation. The Veil Directorate, experts in psychological ops, suppression through fear and narrative. The Remnant Arms Collective, ghost militias, operating behind contracts. Clara called them the 4 Pens. "They don't need bullets," she told Ghost. "They just need us to doubt our handwriting." He nodded. "Let's make our calligraphy sharper." To fight misinformation, Mercy founded the Dust Press. Not a newspaper. Not exactly. A traveling wagon outfitted with printing plates, loudspeakers, and a fleet of solar typewriters. It moved town to town, collecting and verifying, printing broadsheets with phrases like, "Liar's ink dries fastest, don't let it set. Memory is drought-proof when sung. The page listens, do you?" The Dust Press became legend. So the syndicate tried to bribe it. Mercy laughed them off. Then printed their offer on the front page. In full, with annotations. One night, Clara rode north. Alone. She reached a cliff settlement called Windthread, where the wind never stopped and voices could be heard across. Stone-like whispers. She came because of a rumor that someone had found a pre-Accord archive hidden inside an abandoned mining shaft. It was true. The archive was made of bone. Not human, carved. Femurs, rib cages, pelvises of giant mammals, each inscribed with events, deaths, recipes, love stories. The Mammoth Codex. Locals called it. Clara wept when she saw it, because it proved what she'd always believed. Memory didn't start with ink. It started with need. She spent the winter cataloging the CODEX. Then taught the town how to build. Song archives not just sung ballads, but layered harmony-based information structures. A chorus might encode a disaster timeline, a counterpoint, population figures. Bridge sections held rumors. Refrains, corrections. The entire settlement memorized them. No paper. No server. Just echo, and melody. When spring came, Clara left behind her boots. "The ground here knows me now," she said, and walked barefoot out. In Green's Fork, the orchard stood, blackened. Most trees had survived the heat, but the leaves curled inward. As if protecting something unseen. Eli built shade frames. Ghost dug a reservoir tunnel. And the town gathered seeds with names like Whisper Cornishuff Ruffoft, not in any scientific registry, but real all the same, because they'd been spoken, because they'd been planted, because they'd survived. Accord added a new rule: no name planted may be questioned if it grows. It wasn't a decree, just an understanding. If a word bore fruit, let it live. Language shifted. Children said drought and meant trial, said assembly and meant reckoning, said margin and meant memory you can carry alone. The dust chapter wasn't just about endurance. It was about redefining the ink and remembering that the page had always been the land. One dusk, Clara was asked to bless a birth, not as a priest. As a page keeper. She knelt beside the baby, wrapped in linen and orchard bark. And whispered, "May your story be too long for one chapter. May your pages never burn. And if they do, may the ash still sing your name." That night, the wind brought rain. Real rain. No tech. No sabotage. Just clouds that remembered how. It struck the orchard like applause. The trees groaned. The soil breathed. The town wept. Clara stood in the center. Didn't say a word. She just opened her arms. And let the water write. And the trees were still singing. It had been 2 years since the Ashline Accord was born, and the dust chapter had scattered memory like seeds across the continent. The world hadn't changed all at once, but it had tilted, a little. Just enough for a new kind of sun to rise. Green's Fork was no longer a footnote on a smudged map. It was now a node in a living memory web, one of many. Its orchard, once nearly erased, had become something else entirely. A living archive. Each tree bore a tag, not a barcode, not a nameplate, but a line from someone's story. Carved, burned, painted, whispered. One read, "He never missed dinner, even during the fire." Another, "She knew every bird by wing beat." And one, near the oldest root, simply said, "We remember." Clara was older now, not frail, not slowed. Just a rooted. She spent mornings with Ghost and Eli walking the orchard, checking irrigation, pruning thoughts. Afternoons were for stories. Children gathered beneath the shade to hear tales, not just of Green's Fork, but of all the places the margin had reached. A village in the tundra that grew light bulbs from frozen soil. A desert town that traded in melodies instead of coin. A coastal settlement where tides carried messages carved into coral. The world had listened. And then it had begun to answer. The assembly, what remained of it, was no longer a threat, not because it had vanished, but because the people had outgrown its shadow. Its documents still circulated in cities. Its proxies still held power in some courts, but no one whispered anymore when defying them. The fear had burned away, and what remained was song. One day, Clara received a visit, not from an emissary, not from a stranger, but from a girl with orchard hair and a satchel of paper. She was 13. Her name was Lark. She had come from Twin Hill, bearing a ledger of her own. "I want to add this to the archive," Lark said, "but only if you say it belongs." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Do you believe it does?" "Yes, then it does." Lark's ledger was different. Each page was illustrated with marginalia, tiny drawings, symbols, impressions from leaves and pressed flowers. It told not just facts, but feelings. One page bore only a sentence. I was sad for no reason, so I planted a tree. Another had a map of Green's Fork sketched by memory, with a note. Here. Someone gave me a warm biscuit and didn't ask my name. Clara felt something ache behind her eyes, because that, she realized, was the whole point. The ledger didn't need to prove anything. It just needed to remember. That night, they held the echo vigil. Not for the dead, not for loss, but for presence. Each person brought a line they wanted remembered. They whispered them into the fire. The flames danced. The air shimmered. No one cried. They just listened. Ghost stood beside Clara, holding her hand. Eli passed outside her. Mercy, now a grandmother, played a melody on an instrument her grandson had made from irrigation pipe. And Lark, standing on a stump, read from her ledger. This place made me more than I thought I could be. In the days that followed, the orchard began its bloom. But this year, something new happened. The blossoms weren't just white. Some bloomed blue, others deep gold. A few the color of ash caught in sunlight. Botanists would later argue about the cause: mutations, cross-pollination, soil changes. But the town knew these were memory blossoms, each one grown from words, left at the roots. Each one a story in color. They never picked them, they just watched them sway, and sometimes, in the quiet, they sang back. Clara never announced a goodbye, but one morning her cabin door stood open, and her satchel was gone. On her desk, a single page. Pages end. But stories wander. She had left again. As she always did. To find the next blank page. To listen where no one had yet whispered. The orchard remained. The ledgers thickened. The dust press, now run by Mercy's granddaughter, printed new editions weekly. The echo clause was taught in schools. Ink steel markers stood in every town square. Not monuments, not gravestones. Just reminders. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Write, even if no one's watching. Remember, even if the world forgets. Far in the north, a settlement Clara once visited built a wind sculpture that howled in perfect fifths during storms. They called it the Lantern's Call. And when travelers heard it, they knew. This place remembers. This place remains. In the center of Green's Fork, beside the oldest tree, a child sat with a book. She opened it. Blank page. She smiled and began to write. In a town where trouble once came with the wind, someone stayed, and because they stayed, we learned to stay too. The wind turned. The blossoms stirred. And the orchard listened.